There was a time when every thought felt important, not because it was profound, but because it arrived with urgency. Each thought asked to be noticed, to be considered, to be followed. Some thoughts were loud, some were quiet, but almost all of them carried a subtle demand. Look at me, do something with me, respond. It wasn't always stressful. Sometimes it felt like engagement, like being mentally active, like staying involved with life. But over time, it becomes clear that most of this activity isn't required. Thoughts continue to appear, but something changes in how they arrive. They stop knocking, they stop pulling, they stop insisting that attention belongs to them. This doesn't happen because you ignore thoughts, and it doesn't happen because you learn to control them. It happens because attention stops being automatically assigned. At first, the change is so subtle it's almost missed. The thought appears, and nothing follows. No reaction, no internal response. No agreement or disagreement, just a thought passing through. First, this can feel wrong. The mind has been trained to believe that thoughts must be handled, processed, answered. So when a thought appears and nothing happens, there can be a brief pause of uncertainty. Was I supposed to do something with that? But the moment continues. The body continues. The environment doesn't wait. And slowly, it becomes clear that the thought didn't need anything from you. It just passed through on its own. This is one of the first noticeable shifts when the inner narrator loosens. Thoughts stop recruiting attention. They no longer act like instructions. They become background movement instead of foreground authority. This doesn't mean thinking stops. Thoughts still show up in familiar ways. Plans still form. Memories still surface. Language still operates. But thoughts lose their status. They no longer define the moment. They don't automatically become the center of experience. Instead, they drift through like weather. Some are brief, some linger, some dissolve quickly, and none of them ask to be followed. At first, the mind may try to reclaim attention. A thought might say, "This is important. You should think about this. You're missing something." But those are just more thoughts. They no longer carry weight. They don't trigger movement. They don't initiate internal conversations. They appear, they fade, and nothing is lost. This is often misunderstood as detachment, but it's not detachment from life. It's detachment from unnecessary mental ownership. You're not pushing thoughts away. You're just not adopting them. There's a difference. Adoption creates responsibility. Once you adopt a thought, you feel obligated to act on it, to justify it, to defend it. When thoughts aren't adopted, they remain free. They don't become problems. They don't become plans. They don't become stories. They're just mental events like sounds or sensations. This creates an unexpected sense of space. Not silence, space. The mind still moves, but it no longer fills every gap. There are pauses between thoughts that aren't uncomfortable. They don't need to be filled. They don't need to be explained. They're simply there. And in those pauses, attention naturally rests in the environment, in movement, in sensation, in whatever is already happening. There's less inward turning, less monitoring, less checking what you're thinking about. You stop asking, "What am I thinking right now?" Because it doesn't matter. Thinking happens when it needs to. When it doesn't, life continues anyway. This shift changes how problems are approached. Before, a thought would appear and immediately create urgency. Something needs fixing. Something needs deciding. Something needs resolving. Now, thoughts still show possible issues, but they don't demand immediate engagement. They don't trigger spirals. They don't pull you into internal debates. Instead, they sit quietly, and often, without attention feeding them, they dissolve on their own. Problems that once felt heavy lose their grip, not because they're solved, but because they were never as urgent as the mind suggested. Action still happens when necessary. Decisions still get made, but they come from context, not from pressure. The body senses when to respond. The situation informs the movement. There's no internal committee weighing every option. This creates a surprising sense of ease. not because life becomes simpler, but because mental friction decreases. There's less resistance between what's happening and how it's experienced. Thoughts used to stand between you and the moment. Now they move alongside it. They're present, but not obstructive. One of the most noticeable changes is how repetitive thoughts lose power. The mind has habits. It repeats familiar phrases. It replays old concerns. It revisits unresolved scenarios. Previously, each repetition felt like a reminder, like something unfinished. Now, repetition doesn't mean relevance. A thought can repeat without becoming significant, can appear again and again without triggering concern. It's just a habit playing itself out. And without attention reinforcing it, it eventually weakens. This isn't effort. It's absence of reinforcement. The mind learns through attention. When thoughts no longer receive it automatically, they lose momentum. They don't disappear entirely. They just stop dominating. There's a noticeable shift in emotional tone too. Thoughts used to fuel emotions. A thought would appear and emotion would follow. Now, emotion can arise independently, and thoughts may or may not accompany it. Sometimes emotion comes without explanation. Sometimes thoughts appear without emotion. They're no longer fused. This separation creates clarity without analysis. You can feel something without needing to explain it. You can think something without needing to believe it. Neither requires resolution. They pass. The day continues. There's also a shift in how planning happens. Planning used to involve long internal conversations, imagining outcomes, anticipating problems, rehearsing responses. Now, planning becomes functional. The thought appears, plan forms, the plan is noted, and then attention returns to the present. There's no need to keep replaying it. No need to mentally rehearse success or failure. When the time comes, action happens. This reduces mental fatigue, not because you're doing less, but because you're carrying less. The mind stops being a constant workspace. It becomes a tool that's used when needed, then set down. One of the subtler changes is how self-referential thoughts fade. Thoughts about who you are, how you're doing, how you're being perceived. They still appear occasionally, but they don't linger. They don't pull attention inward. They don't initiate self-evaluation loops. There's no longer a sense that these thoughts are central to living. They feel optional, like background noise that doesn't require response. This creates a quiet confidence, not the kind that announces itself, the kind that doesn't need reinforcement. You don't need to reassure yourself. You don't need to remind yourself who you are. Life functions without that internal narrative. Relationships change subtly too. Listening becomes easier, not because you're trying to listen, but because thoughts aren't interrupting. There's less internal commentary while someone else is speaking, less preparation for what you'll say next. You respond naturally, based on what's actually being said. Conversation flows without strategy. There's less effort to be interesting, correct, or aligned. You're simply present. And presence doesn't require thought. It's already happening. Even creativity shifts. Ideas arise without pressure. They don't demand immediate action. They don't need to be captured or preserved. Some ideas move into action. Some fade. Both outcomes are fine. There's no anxiety about losing ideas. If an idea matters, it will return. If it doesn't, it wasn't needed. This trust reduces mental hoarding. You don't collect thoughts anymore. You let them come and go. The mind feels less crowded. Not empty, just uncluttered. Thoughts have room to move without colliding. And because they're not colliding, they don't generate friction. This doesn't mean challenges disappear. Life still presents difficulties. But challenges are met directly, not mentally rehearsed. You deal with what's in front of you, not with imagined futures, not with remembered failures, just with what's happening now. This creates efficiency without striving. You're not trying to optimize experience. You're just responding to it. One of the quietest signs of this shift is how little you care about what you're thinking. You don't track it. You don't analyze it. You don't judge it. Thoughts happen or they don't. Either way, life continues. There's a kind of relief in this. Not dramatic relief, subtle relief, like setting down a bag you didn't realize you were carrying. Nothing changes externally, but something is lighter. The mind no longer feels like the center of experience. It becomes one element among many. Sound, movement, sensation, thought, all happening together, none demanding dominance. This isn't a state to maintain. It's not something you hold on to. It's simply how things operate when attention isn't constantly redirected inward. Thoughts don't ask for attention anymore. And without that demand, attention rests naturally in life. Not because you place it there, because that's where it already is. This is not an ending. It's a quiet adjustment, a rebalancing. The mind returns to its proper role, supportive, occasional, unremarkable, and life continues, uninterrupted by commentary, unburdened by constant thought, just moving, moment by moment, without asking for attention.